Okay, so it's 12:30. Before we go back on record, I just want to do a quick roll call here to make sure we have folks. So I see Chair Foster, Board Member Walsh, Board Member Holmes, I see.
I'm here.
I see you now, Robin. It's a lot of people to scroll through. And Dr. Merman, I
As am I.
see.
Yep.
Okay, and Karen, I see you. Just make sure we have all the witnesses who I believe are supposed to still be here. So Mr. Morris,
Present.
Scott Walters, is Mary Broadworth still with us?
Present.
And Dr. Coleman,
Present.
Mr. Dillon,
Present.
Dr. Epen,
Present.
Ms. Hoare,
Here. Present.
Dr. Leffler,
Present.
and Beth. I think I butchered your last name last time. Sinu?
Senu, present.
Sinu, sorry. Mr. Stanislaus,
Present.
Rick Vincent,
Present.
and Dr. Bender, are you still with us, or did we let you go?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. And then coming back to Scott Walters, are you with us?
Present.
Great. Okay, Maggie, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, can we go on back on record, please?
We are back on the record.
Thank you. So we'll move now to questions from board members, starting with Dr. Merman. And I'm going to offer to share if board members have questions about portions of the record, like that need to be put up on the screen, I can do that. I can share my screen. It might be easier than trying to direct people to portions of the record. So if that's an option, if you need to do that. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Merman, for questions.
Thanks. Well, I guess thanks so much to everybody for this presentation, for the topic, for the incredible amount of work that's gone into preparing for this. The staff, the CON team, UVM, the application in itself was a heavy lift, and there's been a lot of interrogatories, which have been a lot of work for everybody, but I also think very helpful. A lot of information's come out through those, which have been very helpful for me in my analysis. I think for me, I guess I'll just summarize some thoughts and feelings about the first part of the day, which it's just very heartening to know that the level of dedication and commitment of the UVM team, the providers, the administrators working to try to deliver the best that they can for their patients, the best they can for our community. I see Heather Harrington still on the line. I thought she was leaving, but I was going to call her out, just saying I think we're really lucky to have the Heather Harringtons of the world living in Vermont, and their dedication to that level of specialty care to make it so our patients can receive that care here and at that quality. I also was really struck by Dr. Coleman's comments, I think, about the impact of financial means on the ability for Vermonters to access care, and especially in relationship to where they live. We have a very rural state, and for a lot of people, accessing care on a daily basis is a challenge without transportation to get to even their local hospital. With all of that, I actually really was hoping to start with a discussion with Eve Hoare, and I think I appreciated your comment. What did you say? You like the numbers and you want to go line by line, and there's a section of this that I just really feel like, from my understanding, I think it would just be really helpful to go line by line and some data. And I don't know, Mr. Barber, if you can put up the UVM slides easily, but slide 4 has a nice chart of the surgical demand forecast from UVM. So one of the things that it took me a lot of time to sort through the initial submission and the interrogatories and consultant reports is this whole concept of what is the baseline and and how to think about these forecasted growths over time. And part of that is the baseline kind of has been referred to with a few times with different numbers. I mean, it all sounds like it's around 19,000 patients. The workbook says the actual for 2019 is 19,000. The narrative says 18,749, and a supplement to Q008 question 5 shows 19,152, excluding trauma and excluding these other rooms that don't seem to be being used anymore. There's 2 procedure rooms that were closed at Fanny Allen and 3 of the procedure rooms, I believe, at the main campus, which are used for things other than what is the scope of this application. So I guess my first question is, what is the actual number of inpatient, outpatient surgical cases that was performed in 2019? Is it the 18,749?
Dr. Merman, so thank you for that. So I believe I was just looking over that yesterday, and we gave you that 1877.49 number, gosh, in one of the rounds. I can't remember which round anymore. But here's the reason for the disparity between the 2019 volumes. Okay. So one is, don't forget, we identified this set of general purpose ORs that we were using, right? So we excluded our special cardiology rooms and so on and so forth. So I have to say that that there's a little bit of discrepancy sometimes if you added the just Chris, I'm not sure this is the right example, but if a trauma room was added in one or not, but on the whole, it's the right number. The second thing we did, Dave, was we took all these growth forecasts and our actual volumes, and we tortured every single chair with looking at those numbers with us on the inpatient and the outpatient side and said, are these real? Do you let's talk about the baseline situation. And then we talked about the SG2 growth rates for inpatient and outpatient and said, what do you think? What's going on here? And then we talked about wait lists and so on and so forth. So the delta between that, let's say roughly 19,000 number and the 19,452 is slightly adjusted for wait list volume that we knew was over and above an acceptable wait list amount. We were conservative about that, but here's the catch. If you don't include that wait list volume, that's demand, right? Even though you can't do it, it's demand. And if SG2 says the demand's going to grow by X%, if you don't include some of that excess wait list volume, you're going to miss demand and you're going to miss the growth of that demand. So sorry, I may be getting, I'm
No,
looking
that's-
at you
no,
to
that's
see if
actually
I've gone
helpful.
too deep because you know me about
No,
that.
no.
Yeah, from,
No,
from
we
way
can-
back when, but
this is, yeah. No, I appreciate that. It's
very
true that we,
selectively done. Yeah. And
Yeah.
by the way, Dave, so there's times when you can say, oh, on average, we have an X percent wait list, and then you apply it to every single specialty. That doesn't work here because these cases are different lengths. The story's different. So we did it line by line, going down there to ask that wait list question. So it's only adjusted in a couple of cases. Did that
Great.
answer your question?
I think it's quite helpful. Yes.
Okay.
And I do think that I think one of the other take homes from both this morning, but really reading through all of this material, is that an OR is not an OR is not an OR, and a case is not a case is not a case, and that
Yeah.
everything's, and so which creates
Yeah.
a lot of complexity when you're trying to figure out all of this forecasting. One of the other issues that I think I kind of realized reading through the submission is the complexity of trying to build this forecast in 21 and 22, I guess 22 effectively, which is, sort of nearing the end of this incredible disruption to our healthcare delivery system nationwide, but also then addition the Fanny Allen issues that were around that time as well. And so when I look at this chart that we have up here, FY29 and FY23 look fairly about the same volume. I think the FY23 volume actuals I don't have right in front of me. It was 19.3 or so, if I remember correctly.
I'll go back and look, but yeah, go ahead and go ahead with your
Regardless.
question, but it's pretty,
So
it's a little bit higher than before, but yeah.
Yeah. So my question kind of gets into to this, which is when we kind of start going line by line, we see this big jump between 23 and 24 in this forecast, which I know the forecast was really made in 22, but I'm trying to understand how comfortable we are with this jump, which I believe is 16% outpatient and 9% inpatient. Sorry, I have that backwards. 16% inpatient and 9% outpatient. That's supposed to happen between FY23 and 24 to then regain this 1.1% inpatient growth and I think a 2% outpatient growth.
Oh. Yeah. So I think you're quoting growth rates that are based on, I think it's the Ascendian expert report, if I'm remembering that correctly. I think you.
Yeah, or you can.
One,
I went through the workbook, and,
yeah.
And just sort of calculated them, and that's basically what they were.
Yeah.
For the most part, I think the outpatient had a little higher the year after this, and then kind of settles into 2% for the subsequent years, and the inpatient looked like kind of 1.1.
Yes. So here's what we believe. So this is number one, actuals to projected. So
Yep.
So 2023 is actuals, right? And we were so there's a little bit of Chris, where we're bringing the a little bit of the Fanny Allen ORs, one more OR going online, so a little bit dampened. But this is about believing that demand for healthcare services, despite COVID, and despite our ability to deliver, Dr. Merman, was growing, right? So if we had never had COVID, if we hadn't had a cyber attack and had to close down the Fanny Allen ORs, we would have seen demand growing kind of in that linear way as our population grew.
So the assumption was that there would be a steady increase in demand with a baseline year of 2019. And what we're seeing in 2024 is as if that steady increase had started in 2019.
I think you're catching up, and the easy way to think about this delta here is our growing wait list, right? And despite efforts to, as Dr. Plant says, to kind of do the nip and tuck and find nooks and crannies where we can get these surgeries done. In part, that gap is the growing wait list.
And the wait list that I saw, I've only seen one wait list, I believe, unless there was something I missed in the interrogatories, which was for some reason I remember off the top of my head was like September 8th, 2022 or something like that. There was a one data point in time where there was like 441 cases, but do you have an updated wait list? Is that something you continue to monitor?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it to our master of waitlist data, is Chris Dillon.
Okay,
He
great.
can
Sure.
bring
So
us-
May 16, 2024, we had 524 total patients waiting 60 days or more. 304 of those are waiting 90 days or more.
Okay. Okay, so it's up 75 patients from I think when the submission wait list was. Okay. And I think Dr. Harrington sort of mentioned that, there's a lot of nuances to this as, space is available and whatnot. Okay. So when I'm looking through, I looked through the workbook, which I think is this a document that this seems like a valid document to look at, right? This UVMMC surgical case capacity volume projections model. This is, I believe, something you gave us, correct?
I just want to make super clear I know what you're referencing.
It's I don't know, Mike. Can you get it? It's the 8/15/2023. We had a workbook that I think was given to Mathematica to look, which has the scenario projections from the SG2 adjusted rec factor. I have it as like an Excel sheet.
I'm familiar with that. I'm sure, but I might be the only one else in the room who, or shouldn't say that, but yes,
so
I know that vividly. Go ahead.
So I guess there's a few things that stuck out to me in that, which is sort of what I wanted to kind of look at that other chart based upon, is essentially there's this, and I think our Ascendiant called this out, which is there's the 16% increase in surgical cases from 23 to 24 for inpatient demand. And the way I looked at this workbook, it looked to me that there was a 9% increase in outpatient demand, basically from last year to this year. And in that, there were some interesting trends that kind of stuck out to me that I was curious if we had some data to support. The big trend was that projection general surgical inpatient cases for 23 is 533, but almost triples in 24. That's 2.75 times, maybe at 1491. So this massive increase of nearly almost 900 inpatient gen surge cases, and then also like a 50% increase in inpatient ortho cases from 1,200 to 1,800, which drives like a huge portion of growth, actually, and especially because that hasn't been consistent with more recent data. Is that something? Do we know whether or not there's some external factor or more general surgeons or what's driving this inpatient ortho and gen surge growth that seems to be driving the inpatient growth?
Hearing Officer Barber, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm concerned that we might not be clear about what part of the record we're referring to. So I wonder if we could pin that down and maybe project the relevant data. I think we're talking about the response to the board's Q5 dated August 15th, 2023. And if we could pull up the specific information that Member Merman is referring to, that would be helpful.
Just, yeah, give me a second. So
you're on this email, Mike, but I can forward it to you.
Nope.
Got it.
Q5 corrected response, is that it?
It says actually Q6, and it's a it was this workbook that was referenced, I think, in a bunch of the consulting reports. I just emailed it to you.
I'll recognize it immediately.
I just need to know, is it Q5 or Q6?
It should be Q6, I think. I think it came to us in August. Does that ring a bell, Dr. Merman? And I think we,
You know, I kind
given
of
vacations and such, I think we did get it back till October-ish, November.
This is
Michael,
something
I think it's-
I didn't follow along with previously. So.
Hearing Officer
Oh,
Barber, I think it's our response to the board's Q6 that's dated November 16th of 2023. And the workbook was submitted in response to question 2 of that set.
Right.
Okay, so,
Be at the end.
Vizient. Is there an exhibit number? I'm not seeing any sort of workbook, and
If you
maybe
go
I'll just-
beyond this equipment list thing, I think it might be be on there.
I see a financial assistance.
I just
Continuous
forwarded to
information.
you.
All right, let me go.
Does
Yeah,
it
let me get-
involve confidential information?
No, this was
doesn't-
not submitted under CL.
Great.
Thanks, Laura.
Well, I'm not seeing an email come through from you, Dave. I can go to the website. It may be part of that.
It looks like it didn't.
Q6. Are you all seeing this in real time?
Yep. Yep.
No, it's the same document. I don't know, Tara, are you just any ideas?
It may be in our e-files, as a separate Excel workbook. So it would not,
Is
maybe
it
not
surgical
part of,
case capacity and volume projections model?
There it is.
The one I closed it on my side. Yes.
Okay, it's just slowly.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, Mike, I should have given you the heads up on this one.
This document?
No?
Yeah. So if you
Can
go
you see it?
down. Yep. If you go to the next tab, here we go. Ooh, mine's not colored. OSC projection. Can you? I was looking at the yellow tab here.
Yeah, inputs. Yeah.
Yep.
And then
if you go
scroll
down
down.
a little bit, yep.
Further?
Yeah. So you could go just a little bit more, would be about there's perfect. Okay. So, and you can see in line 50, if you go over through
Yeah.
actual cases 756, 533, and then you go back to
Yeah.
this 2019 baseline, and you
Yeah.
stay at the 2019 baseline, assuming no growth in gen surge cases. Then
Yeah.
line 55 ortho, you have a sort of a downtrend-ish in inpatient ortho, and then 2024 goes back up to the, looks like, my guess is you had a projected increased trend starting in 2019, and you're just catching it all up between 23 and 24. And so from the inpatient demand modeling, to me, and there's of course there's going to be some variability in this, right? This is totally makes like there's something in here that doesn't make sense to me, which is like your surge onc cases were like 27, 28, 34, 86, 137, 28. Like I assume you're not planning on decreasing the amount of surgical oncology you do. And in fact, I imagine part of this is to be able to have the capacity to do more surgical oncology cases. I totally appreciate that. But in the context of the gen surge cases and the ortho cases, they're really a huge amount of the drive of the increased sort of baseline, the 16% bump in inpatient volume that really kind of drives, over time when you apply the growth factors to that, nearly, it's over 1,000 surgeries. So I was just trying to understand if we have any reason to believe that, whether or not we've been understaffed in general surgery and we're going to have more general surgeons and you can take more acute volume, because I assume most of the inpatient general surgery cases are acute volume. I may be mistaken on that, but and then inpatient ortho kind of bucks the trend that I think Dr. Nichols was discussing.
Yeah, so all right, here we go. So a couple of things. Number one, backstory is that, and Chris Dillon and others keep me straight on this, but we switched the systems by which we managed our EHR for our ORs somewhere in the 22-ish timeframe, so that the categories, we noted this in our response, but this was a long time ago. The categories, so gen surge, you're going to see those volumes do one thing, but you're going to see weird additional volumes in other lines. So the way a surgery might have been categorized as gen surge back in the 2021 timeframe versus surge onc or some other spot are a little bit different. So we noted that, and it wasn't to take the time to make everything mesh between two, our legacy OR system and our Epic OR system didn't seem worth the delay getting the numbers back to you guys. That's the way I'm going to explain the general surgery delta that you see. And I think if you look down in general, if you kind of combine all those things, it looks good. On the orthopedic side of things, and I don't know if Dr. Nichols is still on, or Chris, you want to comment on this, but boy, that is a great example of people really putting off surgery during COVID, right? And having those delays really play themselves out, in those years. So we had COVID problems in 2020 and we had COVID problems in 2021. And I know a lot of people who, didn't need to have orthopedic surgeries didn't have them. So that's what I'm looking at, that decrease in the orthopedic volumes. But to your point, we used 2019 as the baseline simply because it was the last normal year where we felt like healthcare systems were working normally. People were getting surgeries in a timely way. And between 2021 and 2022, because of the triple whammy of things that happened to us, we just didn't feel like that was a valid baseline to be using for estimating demand.
Yeah, I can understand that. I did a quick lit search, and quick lit search is a dangerous thing to do because you may not get everything. But the quick lit search I found was that for most surgical volume nationally, by the end of 21, they were back to their 2019 baseline. But I think with Fanny Allen issues and the cyber issues, that could have significantly impacted UVM for 21. But then we get into 22 and 23, and we sort of seem like we're stabilizing on a lot of those things.
May I pass it to Chris, my colleague, Chris Dillon, to comment on that for just a quick sec?
Yeah. I was just going to briefly add, I put my hand up quickly. I think the question you were originally asking was, is the 2024 projection realistic given recent years and the jump from 23 to 24, correct?
Yeah.
Fundamentally,
Yes.
That was your question.
Yes.
So FY24 budget, right? We have 21,804 as our projected cases between the main and the Fanny, 21,804, which I think is roughly in line with that graphic that you had referenced from the presentation.
Yeah.
As of May 1st, we were 23 cases ahead of that budget. So right on that line, which suggests that to me, the 2024 budget is realistic, or the projection here is realistic. What I don't have is where you were going here with the breakdown between different specialties and inpatient versus outpatient. This is total OR numbers across Maine and Fannie. But I thought maybe that could be helpful in putting 2024 in context.
That's super helpful. Do you
Thanks, Chris.
have Maine Fannie broken out at all?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? I heard somebody else pipe in there. I didn't hear your whole
Oh, sorry.
comment or question.
I'm sorry. Do you have the main campus and Fannie split for the 2024? current?
Not in this number set that I have right here. That can be something we can provide to you after the fact. I don't have it.
And is
right in
that-
front of me.
And because I've seen a lot of different number sets that include different procedure rooms, is that number set that you have specific to the ORs that we are talking about in regards to the CON?
I believe it is. Yes, that would be something I'd have to cross-reference as well
Okay.
in
because that came-
follow-up to this meeting.
Okay. Yeah, because that came up a little bit in like the table 7C submissions where one was included endoscopy cases and ECT cases and some other cases. And then the projections were quite a bit higher. And then when it was resubmitted and those cases were removed, the projections were more in line with these projections. So I just would want to make sure that
Yeah.
the numbers that we're
Endoscopy
seeing.
endoscopy is definitely not included in what I just shared. I would have to check on ECT and some others.
Okay. To me, it's really important because if 2023 is really like 19 and change, and 2019 is like 19 and change, there's discussion throughout the narrative about how surgical volumes were essentially flat from 2015 to 2019. Then we have a much flatter trend. I think the lived experience that we were shared with this morning is we don't have a flatter trend. But then again, I think we also, really identified that an OR isn't an OR and is an OR, and there's a difference between numbers of ORs and types of ORs available. But I think that if 2016 was, I think from one of these, this is Q002, page 20, looks like it's 18,888. 2017 was 19,066. 2018 was 19,055, and 2019 was 18,749. But you had that month where Fannie was closed, so it was probably would have realistically been 19 something. But that sounds like a fairly flat trend, and so until 2023, we're still kind of trending fairly flat compared to 2015, 2016. Would you agree with that, or does that seem maybe it's different in 24, but at least for how we're counting cases? 18,888 to 18,847 to 19,2. I get a point. I calculated from 2016 to 2023 a 0.33% annual growth rate, 2.3 overall. Is that should we put up this figure from Q002, page 20?
Yeah, if you could just slow down and point me
Sorry.
to the pages and the
Sorry.
documents, I'm happy to share.
Sorry, Mike.
No, it's all right.
Q002, page 20. Thanks, Mike. There's just so many like these. There's just so many different places where these volumes are documented, and they're a little different in different places. So, as we can see, I took the liberty to add the totals, so they're not listed on this figure, but they basically range within 2% of each other or less, including 2023.
Dr. Merman, is your point that you're not seeing demand increasing over this time period due to these numbers?
Demand is a different thing than
That's
I think
right.
what's actually performed. I think you've discussed that
That's
with
correct.
the wait times, although wait times I don't think were collected until 2019. I'm not sure if they were collected before that. But I wouldn't say that I don't think demand is increasing. But I don't think that's what this is saying. What this is saying is the amount of cases performed seems to be
Correct.
flat.
Yes.
And to sort of complicate this issue, I think that, you know, right before this period of time, or in 2016, there was the ASC application, and there was a sworn statement from Dr. Brumstead in that time that said that I can actually find the quote here, but essentially paraphrasing that there was no, you know, that there's plenty of capacity for now into the near future. And at the time, it appeared that at least Fanny Allen had a fair amount of capacity, but I think that the issue is, or what I mean, I guess, what do you think is the issue with that? I mean, if Fanny Allen at 66% capacity, I think in the 20, oh geez, now I got to get another document you sent me. Hold on a sec, Mike. The one it's the one I had sent you this morning, which was the reference back from the Q008. Apologize, give me a second, I'll tell you the name of it. It's the attachment on Q008.
Yep.
Just give me a minute to get there, please. Why? That's not what I want to show. Oh. Thank you, Tara.
And that one, if you go down, I mean, UVM looks like it's, you know, above capacity there in 2019. If you go back up to the top, you know, 74% capacity, 77, 79, 77, 78. It just is. And then if you go down, though, Fanny was at 60-something% capacity. It's just interesting that at the time that was described as ample outpatient surgical capacity by Dr. Brumstead. Would you agree with that?
I'm uncertain, hearing Officer Barber, about what we're looking at right now. Could we clarify that in the record?
This is an attachment that it's attachment to Q008. I believe it references
I think it's Q6.
question. The Q6. It's Q8. And it's a reference for question 5.
So Dave, I'm going to I'm not going to get into the fine data with you, but I will say that when we commented on the application for the Green Mountain Surgery Center, and we said that we could handle the excess volume, we were wrong. That was a mistake. We should not have said that. We can say, and we know, because when we tried to close the Fanny Allen and bring the outpatient surgery capacity over here by working evenings, nights, weekends, we couldn't do it. We know the Green Mountain Surgery Center is completely full. We actually work well with them now. We're grateful they're in the community. But we did not have the capacity that was projected at that time in 18. There were some other assumptions in there in terms of population growth and so on. But we know from looking backwards now, that was an error in terms of capacity, what we had available to meet that need. I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but I felt like that's kind of where you were going, I thought.
I mean, I think, you know, if you thought you had enough capacity then and you have similar capacity now and you're having troubles, then that doesn't make sense. So one of the two doesn't work. So I think that's the,
I can tell
where
you
we're
that
at.
now, we can let Dr. Plant talk, but we are completely maxed out and full right now,
Yeah.
using every possible space that we can and still building up a backlog. That's the reality of 2024.
And maybe I'll take the opportunity. I'm going to put on the practicing surgeon hat and share that for more than a decade, I and my division have not had enough block time. So we've had waits, we've lost patients to surrounding area centers. You've heard the encumbrance on patients having to travel. I also want to make sure all my comments are with full understanding, David. I would be in your position doing the same, taking hard inventory. So now I have to take off the practicing surgeon hat and I'm going to put on the peri-op management team hat. And I'm going to share with you the here and now. Here and now is that over the last 3 years, we indeed have seen our numbers go up. And I got to share with you, our team has seen an incremental and iterative and baby step process to take on every extra operative space we can. We scrub the schedule regularly with Chris and team. And I also have to remind everybody, healthcare is the ultimate team sport. It's not just about one team or certain set of people. It's a lot of people. And we scrub the schedule regularly, looking at volumes, looking at every place we can find to put more patients on the schedule. I need to share with everybody under oath that this very year, FY25 projection, FY24 actual, our team now has to look and say, we can't really do much more. Every space is full. And the last comment I'm going to make is, and I think it's very important that we remember, it's not cases, it's patients, it's human beings, and it's all of us that, God forbid, we need that surgical care. But I also have to remind everybody that some of that care is, in fact, pediatric dental, not done many other places, if any. And it's also, we, and I'm going to say my team, are lasered on making sure that we continue to offer the mental health service access. And that probably will increase with an increasing cadre of treatments that should be available to our mental health patients. And lastly, we're the institution that is expected to provide 24/7 access to all specialties. And I could spend a day talking about the encumbrance of that. But with that as a backdrop, I hope it provides some insight as to the numbers.
That is super helpful. I'm sorry, I'm having a weird audio thing. I'm just going to disconnect and sorry, back. Yeah, that's super
Dr.
helpful.
Bender?
Yeah, I mean, I was largely going to say what Mark said, but I would just add that when you're looking at these numbers from 15 to 19 that are posted right here, we've actually taken things out of the main campus and moved them over to the Fanny more recently to make more room for things that needed to happen at the inpatient. So what we're doing at the Fanny is different now, but there is a restriction. You know, an OR is not an OR, so there is occasional room at the Fanny, but there are no patients or surgeries that are appropriate for it. So when you're looking at, you know, that whether or not there's space in our ORs, it's the type of space, and we've already talked about this, but we've decanted everything that we can to the Fanny to open up open up on the main campus, but we've done that to the maximum ability. And I think that's an important point that we haven't quite made yet. We have moved things around.
You know, and maybe as an extra element of detail, and Patrick is the best team member you could ever have. Maybe an extra element is there is no HEPA filtration at the Fanny. So that's the way the air is circulated and filtered. You know, we certainly can do the cases we're doing there now, but that's an extraordinary encumbrance amongst others. The other thing I should share is when we're scrubbing our schedule, our relative utilization is well over 80% on a regular basis. And as you've heard, that's over the tipping point of where you're able to be open for the heart attack patients, you know, all the other critical care.
Thanks for that. While we're talking about Fanny briefly, what's the plan for Fanny? Are you going to continue to use do procedures at Fanny, or is Fanny going to be decommissioned from a procedural standpoint?
Dave, we're working through that right now. So those ORs will absolutely be repurposed. We have so many space challenges. Exactly what we do there depends on a number of factors, but I will commit to you that we will be using that space for some kind of patient care need. We haven't quite sorted it out yet.
Okay. And just while we're talking about spaces, other network hospitals in Vermont, I know that, I mean, I know a lot of ED docs, so I hear talks of discussion of a new emergency department down at Porter. Is there any intent in building operative space down at Porter with that renovation?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm seeing shaking heads. I don't want to, not that I'm aware of.
Yep,
Dave.
not that's come up network wide. I mean, I don't know if someone at Porter has been
Nope, I haven't heard-
talking about
I
it.
I just heard of
I have
ED,
not heard it.
ED renovations.
Yeah,
A new ED,
no.
is that's something you're not aware of, or?
Nothing about additional operating rooms in Porter that I've heard about.
No.
Since I arrived here, folks at Porter have been talking about the need for ED construction, mental health beds, specifically in the emergency room, and what it would take to be able to create those. I am not familiar with anything beyond that conversation. I haven't heard anything come back up to me anyway.
Any conversations about expanding operative capacity at Central Vermont Medical Center?
No, other than what we've already been trying to do, and maybe Chris can talk about that, but we've been trying to move appropriate cases where there are surgeons that are willing to go down and there's appropriate anesthesia care to be able to move those cases from the University of Vermont Medical Center to Central Vermont Medical Center. So I know we've been trying to do that with variable success as much as we can. There's obviously, as you know, lots of logistics associated with that. But if you're moving kids, you want to make sure you have pediatric anesthesiologists. But Chris or Patrick, you might have more detail about that. But I know we've been trying, and I've been pushing both Steve and Anna to try to make that happen, because I know that they're just what you heard from Dr. Harrington earlier, that there's a need. And so whatever we can try to do is essentially what I've been pushing. But
Right. I would add that, we have weekly meetings, sometimes twice weekly meetings to triage the schedule at CVMC. When we started that process in February of last year, we had identified an average of 13 open rooms per month on their schedule. The last several months going into the month, 1 or 2 open rooms. So we significantly closed the gap in their available capacity. Those 1 to 2 open rooms are used for add-ons, partial day blocks, things like that, to help CVMC patients gain access to those ORs. So that's been the work. That's been the work ongoing.
I want to pivot to sort of a different topic. This actually kind of speaks a little bit to Dr. Coleman's comments, but also to sort of a general other concept, which is the in-migration, out-migration of patients. In your submission, I believe you said I think it was 51.4 or so % of patients who receive outpatient surgical care, I believe, at University of Vermont Medical Center come from outside the HSA. That's a pretty substantial portion. It appears, again, this is there's a report, at least in 2015 or so, 2016, that said there's about 20% in-migration. Are you guys aware of any significant increase in your in-migration over the last decade? People coming from outside of the region to get surgical care at UVMMC?
So, Dave, I'm going to start at a high level, but I think Dr. Plant can give detail. We know that our surgical specialists, Dr. Harrington, Dr. Plant, orthopedics, are doing many more after-hours cases from across the state of Vermont. We have a lot of volume coming from all over our region where they just don't have coverage after 5 p.m. or on weekends. So there's many weekends where our orthopedic doctors work all weekend covering ortho for the state of Vermont and upstate New York. Our urologists commonly cover urology care after 5 p.m. for the state of Vermont. ENT, I could give you example after example. I think that at a high level is part of it. And Mark, I don't know, do you want to add to that?
I echo that fully. I mean, we're seeing it across those various specialties. And, you know, cardiothoracic is probably the most poignant example of where we have patients in wait in an acute need, but that certainly exists over other specialties as well.
Okay, so my impression is what you're saying is the increase in immigration is largely due to emergent cases or transfer cases.
I certainly believe that. Mark, sorry, but I would also just mention that those cases are largely going at midnight, right? Because there is no room in the schedule for them to go during the day. And so it's not great for them, and it's not great for our surgeons and our anesthesia and our nursing staff. And almost it's very, very common for your patients that you're caring for overnight to be from North Country or what have you. I mean, they don't often get care during the day because we're so full, our block schedules are so full, but they are a large percentage of the patients that get care at midnight or 2 a.m.
I think I just want to make sure the term immigration is, so what I mean by is patients who live outside the HSA receiving care on an outpatient surgical basis within the HSA.
So David, I think I can help you understand as well. There's also the patient demographic, which has transitioned. So where you used to have your radical prostatectomy for prostate cancer at any of a number of hospitals, now the standard is robotic radical prostatectomy, period, full stop. So larger centers have robots, smaller centers don't. That holds true for so many other surgical specialties and procedures. So there is actually a transition to a lot of surgeries as a result of the technology that land in the larger center, hence us. So if that answers the question in it's another thread, there is in migration without question.
Okay.
And it's iterative. You know, we were one of the last, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're one of the last centers that adopted robotics in the area. And no sooner we had one, and suddenly we need two. And I can tell you the service expansion that happened very recently is robotics was generally urology and women's. Now we have acute care surgery, ENT, thoracic, general surgery, colorectal, all needing access to the robot. So again, the transition is also even within our own institution, and I hope that helps.
I think it helps in context. It's hard from a data standpoint from these large swaths of the population, but I think it helps in context. So thank you. Oh, I got a lot of questions. I think I'm going to just do a couple odds and ends that were from the beginning and then pass it off to somebody else and see if my other questions are asked by other board members. But just one question. Dr. Eapen mentioned patient need an OR for an MI transfer. Are cardiac cath labs included in this analysis? I didn't think they were.
No, David, I was referring a very, very specific sort of cases that were brought up by folks when I was traveling, that they would come in, they would appear to be having an MI. The ideal, the ER doc or the doc that was covering the ER, they may not have been an ER doc at that place, but would say, we suspect that this patient is going to need to go to the OR or is going to need to go to the cath lab, and we think they're going to need to go to the OR because there was some prior history that they already had. And it made it very difficult to because we didn't take those patients on a number of occasions from these outside hospitals. And the reason we didn't take them was because we didn't have room or space, or there was fear we would not be able to do the case. And so it was better, it was deemed to be better not to take that patient and let that patient then find another location or have that emergency room find another location. So I can't tell you that we knew at the time that they were definitely going to go to the OR, but that was the fear that was happening, according to the outside hospital.
And I'll
Does
just
that
build
make-
on that.
Does that clarify that? Yeah.
So, and Dave, the other situation, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is we will take someone, they get cathed, they need a triple bypass, but the next available, it's Monday, let's say we take them today from CVMC, and they come up and get cathed and they need a triple bypass, but the next available OR slot that the CT surgeons have is Friday. That person's going to sit in a bed this entire week waiting for their bypass. If that case could go tonight or tomorrow, then that bed's, and they move through the system, then we're available for someone else. That happens all the time. If they're stable after their cath, but they're waiting for bypass, they can sit on the floor a long time, which is not good for anybody.
And my impression reading through this is that your CT surgery ORs are included in these general purpose ORs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just great. I'm gonna tap out for a little bit. I might come back later and ask a few more questions if they're not answered. But thank you.
I think I'm next, so I'll just
Yeah.
go right ahead and jump in. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I have just a couple of questions for the open session. Most of my questions relate to confidential materials. So those will wait until we're able to do it in executive session. So I just did a couple of clarifications. So in the application on page 9, I'll just note that my page numbers don't seem to be matching other people's stated page numbers. So this is the page that has the charts from service line, fiscal year 19, patient origin, and the payer distribution. And I wanted to make sure that I was following the changes in the payer mix calculations throughout the course of the binder. So in the application, the 53% commercial, 26% Medicaid, 26 Medicare, 14 Medicaid, 7 other. In a later question, I believe it was clarified that that is both inpatient and outpatient payer mix. Is that correct?
Member Lunch, this is Eve. I will say that this reflects our payer distribution by number of cases, not
Okay.
by dollars.
Okay, great.
Okay. And you'll see this is about the makeup of the shifted cases. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so then later there's a later discussion in response to the Ascendiant report in your submission, which let me get there and I can tell you when that was dated. Okay, so your response was dated
Robin, would you like,
April 25th.
Yep.
would you like me to try to pull that document up and share it?
I don't think so. I think because it's not a chart or anything, it's just I wanted to confirm that I'm understanding the pair mix that's explained there. So on page 8 of that response, and this is not in the confidential materials, but in the last full paragraph, it indicates for outpatient cases alone, the payer mix split is 75% commercial, 11% Medicare. I believe that is based on dollars. Is that correct?
Mark, I'm going to just confirm with you. This is dollars.
Yeah, well, without seeing the exact numbers up on the screen, Robin, I believe that is dollars when we made that reference.
But Hearing Officer Barber, could we display that page so that we're sure everyone is talking about the same thing?
What page is it?
So it's page 8.
It's page 8 of our submission dated April 25th of 24.
Page 8.
There you go. Yep, you have it.
Okay.
There we
So
go.
in the full paragraph above the partial redaction, the last sentence, for outpatient cases alone, the split is 75% commercial and 11% Medicare.
Yes, those were based upon NPR dollars.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Do you happen to recall whether Medicare Advantage is included in commercial in this split?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. All right. And actually, the other question that I had already was answered in response to one of Member Merman. So let me switch to just checking a couple more. Done. Okay, that was answered. My other question, I think, is for Ms. Hoare. So in the discussion of the equipment list, you mentioned that you consulted with 2 experts who indicated it was not advisable to shift the sterilization to the main campus. Could you just explain why? I guess I can probably guess, but it would be nice to just have in the record why that's a bad idea.
It was a question, I'm going from my member lunch, but my takeaway was that it was a question of capacity, that we couldn't add without putting the service and timely responsiveness to the main campus ORs at risk. We could not add the additional capacity to serve the OSC to that equipment there. Anybody remember differently than that? Chris, any nuance I'm missing that's important? Okay,
No, nothing further than.
thanks.
Okay, thank you. The rest of my questions are in the confidential materials, so I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Board Member Lunge. Dr. Holmes.
Oop. Am I on or am I off? Okay, there's my camera. Sorry. I think I hit the camera instead of the mute. Well, thank you all. This has obviously been a long process and even a long day. So I will try and ask my questions briefly, although I have a fair number of them. My first question is, when UVMMC set out to build the Miller Building, it set a goal for $30 million in fundraising, and I think 1,400 people donated. And I'm wondering, in the initial OSC business plan, there was reference to setting a philanthropy funding goal. I think that was on page 4. And I'm curious as to understand why there wasn't a philanthropy goal set or why there were no fundraising efforts to support this initiative.
Jessica, we've started that work. So we have set an internal goal. We're going to try and raise hopefully 13 million. I've been out and about a lot talking about it. We didn't want to start a hard campaign until we had ideally have a CON approved. We don't want to raise a bunch of money that, maybe couldn't be used for this project. So, but I have been talking about it a lot with people in our community, and I have a lot of other meetings this summer. And we've been pretty clear about the need for it and all of our needs, and also wanting to make sure that we have a certificate of need before we would start bringing in dollars for the project. But we'd like to raise 10% of the cost of the project, 13 million.
Okay, and would that come out of the debt financing or would that come out of the operating cash?
I have not talked to Rick about that. Rick?
Yeah, at this point with our debt capacity, Jessica, I think we take it out of the cash just to keep the day's cash on hand higher.
Okay, great. Thank you. One argument that's cited, I think it's on page 5 that I have of the original CON application, is that sending patients out of state, this is a quote, sending patients out of state for procedures they could receive at home is often more expensive to payers. So I'm just wondering if there's specific data that you have that supports the expected lower per unit cost of the OSC surgeries relative to, say, out-of-state facilities, Dartmouth Hitchcock's outpatient surgery center, for example, which might be the most common other option for Vermonters. So I'm looking for a reimbursement comparison to out-of-state OSCs that would support that argument.
E, are you aware of anything we have like that? Or Mark? Cost of care at an outpatient OSC compared to us? I mean, we know we're an extremely low cost Medicare provider.
Right.
I don't
My
have
focus would
specific-
probably be more the commercial. My focus would be more the commercial reimbursement being lower cost out of state.
I don't have any data to share with you today, but we can pull some together.
I
Okay,
can share
that would be
personal.
great.
I can share personal anecdotal, but so my wife couldn't get care here. She wound up getting care at the Brigham, and you can only see what the I could see the reimbursement from our Blue Cross health insurer, which was it was considerably higher for that same thing for a mammogram was considerably higher than what we would have gotten from Blue Cross. I can only tell you that that's us, self-insured on the Blue Cross. So I know it's a little, so I know it's a belief that we have that it certainly going down to Boston that it costs more, but I can't tell you like statistically what that is. The other part of that I think it's just worthwhile to remember is that we do use those commercial payers to offset the differences between what it costs and what we get from Medicare or Medicaid. And so when those dollars leave the state, it doesn't now offset the cost, the shift that we're trying to make on those as well, right? Because those dollars leave and it's not offsetting the Medicaid, Medicare costs that we are trying to help with on our commercial side when it leaves the state like that. So just a couple of things. I know I'm not answering your broader question, but just to keep in mind that the real issue there.
And you also lose
let me
provider
ask you,
tax.
let me ask you this. How might, the finance team, or you, Dr. Epen, how would you suggest the Green Mountain Care Board ensure that this idea of keeping patients local at the OSC instead of sending patients to an out-of-state OSC will in fact be more affordable for commercial payers? How can we as a board ensure that that's true?
I don't know what, I guess the only way to do it is to find out. You'd have to ask Blue Cross if they'd be willing to share that information as the biggest commercial payer about what it costs them to do it out of state. The constant danger whenever we do that is if you cherry pick particular cases that, if you just take those cases that are going to be less expensive or to do out, then you're left with a subset of a population that's probably, there's a reason why they're not being done elsewhere and they're more expensive here as well, or more expensive elsewhere. So you have to be really careful, and we try really hard to look at them in bulk because of that. So just keep that in mind as you start doing it. That's the big challenge with ambulatory surgery centers that are for profit or are equipped to do very specific cases, right? All the other stuff that happens with it doesn't get covered. So an emergency, the bleeding that happens in the evening or the weekends or the follow-up that has to happen, there's no follow-up there. They're going to come back to us or our local, whoever the local provider is. We take everyone. So it doesn't matter, if they're complicated, they need a particular device that's expensive. If you're a standalone surgery center somewhere, you just say, we don't provide that device. We don't cover that kind of a patient. We don't take the complex patients, right? So you have to be really careful. But I think it's a good question. Overall, how would we look at that? I defer back to Mark and Rick from the Philosophic if we can get more granular.
And one other comment, Jessica, I hope we're not thinking that we should ask 4,000 Vermonters who have Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial to have to travel as far away as New Hampshire, Albany, or Mass General to get outpatient surgery. That seems not like a good plan for people in our region who need care. as I think about the AHEAD model, potentially Vermont signing on, not being able to provide that care here at the medical center would make that model extremely difficult because we'll have to pay the Medicare rates to those other hospitals when those people are leaving. So I just can't imagine that using state surgery centers out of the state of Vermont is in the best interest of people who need care. I saw Rick's hand, I think.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, Mr. Vincent, did you want to say anything, or I saw your hand raised?
Yeah, so I think there may be a way for us to do this, Jessica. The other thing I'll just highlight is, even though the focus or the question was on commercial, for Medicaid patients, as you know, I mean, we have a fixed prospective payment program. So really anything that does go out of the state from a Medicaid perspective, that is increased out-of-state spend that does hit our target. That's not part of that. That's not part of that fixed payment.
Let me just see, Mr. Stanislaus testified earlier about that the project will generate, quote, so many efficiencies. And I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit about, so there's also on page 7 of the application, I believe, it talks about the OSC will support higher provider productivity, greater patient access to care, which we've heard a lot about all day today, and I appreciate the efforts there. I'm a numbers person, so I'm trying to get a handle on the materiality of this. And so do you have, for example, benchmarked percentile work RVUs per clinical FTE of your current surgeons, and then what you're expecting to see in terms of those productivity numbers with the new facility? I know there's some Sullivan Cotter benchmarks that are referenced, I think at some point in the interrogatories, but I'm looking for a sense of the before and after productivity projections to determine the magnitude of the improved efficiencies. Is there a way to do that?
I'm going to start, Member Holmes, and let some folks jump in. So one of the things we were hesitant to do for the pro forma is to model lots of efficiency, which would have, or unrealistic efficiency because of a couple of things that are happening. So one is we are taking, we've talked a little bit about the shift from inpatient to outpatient, but basically we're taking more complex cases and moving them out of the main ORs, inpatient and outpatient, and putting them in this outpatient surgery center. And so I think it's fair, I'll say as a non-clinical person, that this is new territory. And while we believe there are opportunities for efficiencies, to model those efficiencies in a pro forma from the get-go, when this will be somewhat new territory for us, we didn't think was honest and fair. And so you won't see super duper efficiencies modeled in that pro forma. We think there's opportunity, and then I don't know if Scott Walters is still on, but we believe there's opportunity once we get a year or so under our belt to do that. I think the other thing we learned from our Vizient friends, and I'm sure Dr. Plant lives this and Dr. Bender lives this every day, but the longer the surgery, a little bit of variation is, mathematically more minutes. And so the stakes of being overzealous about the efficiencies that you could gain, particularly when we compare ourselves to Vizient benchmarked, didn't seem to be responsible from the pro forma point of view. Rick Vincent, you're on.
Yeah, I think the surgeons may be able to give you a sense of that, but just concretely in the back and forth with the consultants, we did highlight the need, or they highlighted actually the need to add some additional costs for increased work RVU productivity. So not necessarily that we're going to add more surgeons, but that it may result in a higher salary level. So that alone, there is a piece there that we can highlight for the board on what we're expecting.
In terms of the
Okay, but to the
efficiencies,
extent, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, thank you for the question. And I would say I'm a numbers person as well. In terms of the efficiencies from a pure standpoint, we're also looking at a facility that's built to 2024 and on standards. That means that the rooms are bigger. They're going to allow for more flexibility of equipment maneuvering. There's a pre-anesthesia room. So you're preparing the next patient for surgery as you're completing the surgery where the prior patient is in the room. So it actually, you know, much has changed in surgical care delivery that we just can't put into the Fanny. So there's an actual physical space upgrade that is very, very significant.
That makes a lot of sense. And so would it, and I understand how it's hard enough to build a pro forma, you know, going out 5 years, and I can appreciate all of the assumptions that have to go into it, and not having a full sense of all the efficiency gains that are possible would make it challenging, but even more challenging. So is it fair then to say, since not all the efficiencies are modeled, and throughput may be higher and costs may in fact, cost per case may in fact be lower just because of the efficiency gains? Is it fair then to say that the revenue may be underestimated and the costs may be overestimated if all of the efficiencies were considered?
I mean, I can chime in
I'll
and
go,
say,
I'll go, Mark,
sorry.
I was gonna say yes.
I was gonna say yes.
Fair
as
enough. That's
well.
all I need is a yes. That's okay. I know we're short on time, but yes is fine. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's nuanced and it's complicated because of the reasons that Mark said that I don't want to just gloss over, right? If you take the exact same kind of cases and you move them over and you just do them. So I'm going to use the example of cataract surgery. Just take the same cases and move them over. You will do more cases per OR per day. So you will say, yes, the cost will go down, productivity will go up. If you move more complicated cases that you weren't prior doing in an ambulatory surgery center, the number of cases may stay the same, may even go down. And so, you know, when you look at that, I mean, and I'm just taking cataract surgeons and what they're doing, that same person you may look at them and go, well, they're not being as productive, or they're only being equally productive because you're not accounting for the comorbidities and the complexities associated that now we can do in an ambulatory surgery setting. So, but having just the nuance that's there, but having said all that, I'll just still answer your question. Yes, I think we were conservative. I really do, but Eve can answer that better. But
Okay, so actually, so given what you just said, and given all the possible efficiencies that could be gained, that'll increase throughput and hopefully reduce the wait times that I think we've heard a lot about today and have heard about for years. I guess my similar question would be, I don't know if you still use Vizient for benchmarking wait times, if I'm getting that right, but I'm wondering, where are you currently at with your surgical wait times, benchmarked percentiles, and then what do you expect you'll be able to achieve in terms of the percentile if this OSC would open? I mean, what again, I'm looking for magnitudes of impact on patient access, and if there's a way to measure that, or if you've thought about a way to measure that. What would success look like? What is your percentile wait time now, and what would it look like if all the efficiencies are gained and throughput is realized?
Patrick Bender, you probably know the Vizient data as well as anyone on the screen. Have you seen Vizient data around surgical wait times?
Not in terms of how the average amount of days that you're waiting.
Yeah.
The way that we're measuring it is what Chris alluded to earlier, which is how many people are waiting more than X amount of weeks out, right? So right now we're doing 60 and 90 days. But Vizient, I mean, I used to be chief quality officer, and Vizient does not have that like average amount of or a percentile. Sorry.
Chris,
That's okay.
do you have
So
some? So
ahead.
Chris Dillon may have something. Chris,
No,
do you have
not,
around?
not from a benchmarking perspective. I was just gonna, repeat the numbers that we cited when Dr. Merman asked, and just say our goal is to get those 90+ cases down to 90+ days down to 0. Like, we don't want people waiting more than 90 days for any surgery. Obviously, there are some surgeries that need to go much sooner than 90 days, and we triage those under, Dr. Plant and Dr. Bender's leadership. But certainly those 90+ days, we want to see very few, if any, patients waiting that long.
So the potential is 304 now that are waiting 90+ days. So you would hope that that's 0. And then of the 60+,
Correct.
there's 524
Yep.
60+. What would that look like if this was successful, this OSC?
Certainly significantly reduced would be our goal. We haven't set a hard target for what we want in terms of our patients waiting in the neighborhood of 60 days. But once we accomplish our 90-day target, we're going to refocus on 60-day and keep going.
Okay. I guess I'm asking a lot of questions about benchmarking, but it looks like you or potentially Stroudwater, I think, used IntelliMarker benchmarks to look at reimbursement rates. IntelliMarker appears to also compute 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles for operating expenses for ambulatory surgery centers per case and per OR. I'm wondering how your projected cost per case or cost per OR compares to those benchmarks in IntelliMarker.
Eve, is that something that you have?
No, it's not something that I have, and we could get that back to the board. I want to be really careful about case mix, right, within those specialty lines. That could I'll just leave it at that. As you know, as a numbers person, Member Holmes.
That's fair. And also comparing it, I also understand comparing it to an academic medical center, surgery center would also be helpful. I just wondered if there was any, I'd love to just see some cost per case, cost per OR comparisons against benchmarks. And it looked like IntelliMarker had some of that. So that would be really helpful. Okay. Fanny Allen, a couple questions about Fanny Allen. Will there be any opportunity to repurpose any of the equipment in Fanny Allen for the new OSC? And has that repurposed equipment been factored into the cost of the equipment in the new OSC?
Beth?
I would have to go back and refer to our equipment list. Dr. Bender, do you have a comment on that?
I do. I do. We have upgraded the central sterile reprocessing equipment at the Fanny Allen, which is what is responsible for cleaning the operating room instruments, as well as the equipment from some of our clinics. And that was bought with the main purpose of being able to transport them over to the OSC if and when we build that. So there, at least from that standpoint, yes, there is some OR equipment that will be moved from Fanny to the OSC.
And it would already have been factored into that equipment expense, or
that one I'm not sure. That's probably an Eve question, but I can tell you that when we purchased that, we picked this stuff that would be useful for. We need it now anyways, but we knew that it would be useful for the OSC as well because it will still have many years and cycles left in its capabilities.
Yes. And the items that we are reusing at the OSC are indicated on our equipment plan.
Okay, so then Ms. Horde, they are factored into the financials, the cost savings. Sounds like yes. I just want to make sure there's a yes. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
According to our facilities partners, our last major renovation of the Fanny Allen ORs was 30 years ago. So I'm going to say yes, some reuse, but given the fact that the last renovation was 30 renovation was 30 years ago, I am going to acknowledge that the opportunity to reuse a lot of the equipment that's sitting in those ORs or probably in those peri-op areas is not huge. I don't have the numbers behind that, but I wanted to be honest with you. I think that sets the context fairly.
In reality, Eve, it's probably the sterile reprocessing and some of the newer equipment that we have purchased to do cases at the Fanny that we haven't historically done there that we've just purchased, and then we'll eventually go to the OSC. But you're right, it's small buckets.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Dr. Bender.
Operative word, some.
Okay. For that which you are not going to repurpose, is there an opportunity to sell to anybody else on some secondary market any of the equipment that you're not going to use, and is there potential revenue opportunity there? That's
The
not
greater
factored into the pro forma.
So I'm not an expert in that space, but I can tell you specific to Eve's comments about 30 years, I think the opportunity for us would be to find a center that would be in need of the equipment, not looking to sell it for.
So donation.
Yes.
Or our own network hospitals.
Or definitely our own network, but again, not leaving any piece of equipment behind.
Dr. Leffler mentioned the Fanny Allen being repurposed for patient care a little while ago. So if it's patient care, would it be safe to assume that there might be additional incremental revenue generated from freeing up that Fanny Allen space due to this project? There might be obviously some costs associated with that, but how do you think about that in terms of the incremental pro forma if that space is going to be used, say, for patient care with potential revenue opportunities?
Depending on what the project was, I think we'd have to think about a CON if we had to upfit it for something else. So I'm confident we're going to use that space because we need it. We're so space constrained for everything that we do. Exactly what goes there, we really haven't got into in-depth conversation yet. Although I will tell you, I get a lot of emails from people with good ideas for what they want. Clinicians want to put a lot of different things there, I'll tell you that. So I think there is potential, yes, to generate revenue there because I think we will be doing patient care activities. But I think it's too early to know exactly what that looks like and would require a CON and what the revenue from that would be or the cost potentially. We could put something there that's the right thing to do that would lose money.
Okay. Mental health? I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
The staffing numbers reflect an assumption of, I think it's 25% travelers and for OR RNs, and then 10% for surgical tech and paranesthesia RNs. And again, I'm actually trying to get a benchmark assessment here to see if how those numbers might compare to other high performing OSCs. You know, for example, does IntelliMarker benchmark the percent travelers in surgery centers? See, is that a reasonable percentage?
Yeah,
thank you. Sure. Hi, Jessica. This is Mary Broadworth. We just to kind of share the way that healthcare staffing works is that we always have travelers in our equations because of leave of absence, coverage, a variety of things. 10% would be a real good average, right? So that's kind of what we put in for the ancillary staff. 25% for or ORN specifically, because you have to get that specialty skill depending on the service line. And so, you know, we're going to have more travelers likely in those places. And that's why we assumed a higher rate there. It's getting the right skill mix. We can't necessarily move internal folks because they may not have the skill area.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of, is that high for other, I recognize there's always some percent travelers, but I'm trying to get a benchmark assessment of what would be, you know, what is expected or what is typical, I guess, in other outpatient surgery centers. We've seen a huge variation across hospitals in the percent of nurse travelers. So I'm trying to get a better sense of this benchmark.
So, Mary, why don't you give the update on the current Fanny Allen situation, which is probably our best projection?
So Fanny Allen, which has outpatient surgery, and we have RNs there for para-anesthesia. So pre and post-op RNs, we're down to very few travelers. I think it's 4 as of this week. And we still are using quite a few OR RN travelers across both campuses. To answer your question, Jessica, I think what's hard for everyone to predict is nothing is quite settled back to normal regarding staffing. And so I don't think anyone our peers or any other staffing agency has a benchmark for ORRNs by service line that we would find reliable right now.
Okay.
So I think 25% is very conservative and probably about right.
Okay, so let me ask you a little bit about the conservativeness of it, because it's a big cost, right? We know the travelers cost more, right? You know, there was information in the submission that suggests that they do in fact cost more. And I think Dr. Nichols actually just suggested perhaps in his testimony that it may actually reduce efficiencies to some degree to have, high proportions of travelers. So I guess in the 2023, I think there was some data that was in question 5 on page 3, like 5 of the 9 months reported in 2023 had actually less than 25% OR travelers for nurses, and 6 of the 9 months were below the 10% for the other categories. And so it does seem conservative to me, if one for, the more than half of the months, you were actually below that already. And I think I heard earlier testimony that the traveler rates have come down even more. So I guess I would say it seems like that might be a high estimate of the cost, a conservative estimate of the cost. If in fact the travelers go down, and in fact you're already most of the time below the 25 and the 10, and there's a lot of testimony today and also in your submission about all the efforts that are being done to reduce contract workers. And so if those efforts work as designed, and the traveler costs continue to come down, it seems like this is an overestimate of costs.
So
trying to get a
I would
sense
say-
of that as well.
I would say in general, yes to all of that. It is a conservative estimate. We wanted to make sure to build a model where we could staff it to care for people, because once again, our North Star on this was to get those 4,000 people care. And so if that requires a certain percentage of travelers, that's what we're going to do. I think everything you said is true, that's a very conservative estimate in terms of the numbers and the cost. But if this project's approved and we open it, we want all 8 of those ORs going full speed and not being held up because we don't have enough of a certain type of provider to have the room run efficiently.
Okay. I have a couple other, I'm actually close to being done. So in the initial business plan, it's stated, and this I'm just going to need some help walking through because I was trying to pull it all together in the various parts of the submission, and it relates to how ancillary services are treated in the pro forma. So in the initial business plan, it was, I think, on page 28, it said some related cost and revenue impacts have been excluded from the analysis. The cost and revenue for pre-surgery and post-surgery services, for example, imaging, labs, office visits, are not included in the financial pro forma. Margins from those services would likely further increase the margins in the financial analysis. And then it seemed like the CON initially was consistent with that exclusion, but then I saw an evolution in subsequent interrogatories regarding assumptions about utilization of ancillary services. Although I don't think they went out as far as the financial projections, but it did seem like there was then a bump up of 1% or 2% of utilization for some of those ancillaries. But then question 2 on page 12, it was June 23. It did say again, with respect to project-related increases, no additional volumes for non-operating room services are included in the financial pro forma for several reasons. One of them being our analysis indicates that we are already capturing the vast majority of diagnostic, lab, and post-procedure follow-up and therapy volumes related to outpatient surgeries for patients who ultimately seek surgery services outside of UVM due to our limited surgical capacity. So I was having a hard time tying this all together, trying to figure out, it sounds like utilization is expected to perhaps increase, but then maybe it isn't. And then I wasn't sure if at the end of the day, whether those ancillary volumes associated with the increased surgeries and procedures that are going to potentially happen at this OSC if it's opened are included or not included in the financial modeling. So hopefully I asked that question in a way that's understandable, but it seemed I couldn't quite follow the dots throughout the very large binder that I have about how those were treated, what were the utilization assumptions, and whether those utilization assumptions are an underestimate of potential revenue that could be generated from ancillary services and whether they ended up in the pro forma or not. Hopefully that is a clear question.
Eve, are you able to take that?
I'm going to try. I'm going to split this up into a demand answer and a pro forma answer, if that makes sense. So in
Perfect.
terms of demand, we did not estimate the additional need for lab services or imaging services that are associated with this increase in volume. And in particular, we did that because SG2 forecasts for future demand on imaging, for example, the 3T MRI business plan that we gave you, take the demand for imaging that's associated with injuries or other conditions that will require orthopedic surgery down the road. They already take that into account. So if we added our own estimate of need for that imaging and put it on top of SG2, we might be overstating demand. So if that makes sense, that's the way we went. On the pro forma, we all know that inside a CPT code, that there are charges for services that are post-surgical and so on and so forth. So again, what we wanted to do was to keep it as clean as possible so that we could see the impact of opening this OSC. So we have captured those downstream costs that are associated with the CPT code in the pro forma under the direct costs, and likewise on the inpatient side. But we did, and we kind of drew the boundaries there, member Holmes, and then said, okay, if there's other costs and revenue associated with labs that happen, months before your surgery, or an imaging that happens a month before your surgery, we're gonna leave that outside the scope of this thing. And again, it was our attempt to be true and I guess conservative about the financial impact of just this decision, because it, as you can understand, it might lead you down the road to other things. It's kind of related to your Fanny Allen question, where it's where do you choose to draw the boundaries of a business, of a pro forma and the business plan itself and its impact. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. So to the degree that patients are returning to the HSA who perhaps have been seeking care elsewhere because they couldn't get in to see the specialist because they weren't going to be able to get to their surgery, potentially that's revenue that could be recaptured that's not included. Office visits, 2 months earlier labs or diagnostic imaging, things like that. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and my final question is, so in the responses, there is repeated reference to expected increases in commercial insurance commensurate with cost inflation. And I think we heard Mr. Vincent talking about that as well earlier. So 2 questions related here. On page 6, in response to question 5, there was an estimate of cost inflation of 5% for 2024, 4% for 2025 and 2026, and 3.5% in 2027. The first question is, I don't think that those cost inflation estimates align with the year-over-year operating expense growth projected in Table 3A in the submission for UVM, the sort of Table 3A UVM level operating expense growth. So I wanted to first understand that.
Rick, are you able to take that?
Yeah, I was trying to get to the page, but let me answer at high level, and then Eve and Mark, if you can get to that page, just to make sure that we directly answer it. So total operating expenses includes both cost inflation and any increases that we have. So you saw the staffing grid, for example, that we're going to have to add staffing to the center to be able to take care of the patients, and then any other incremental volume related increases are also part of the total expense increase. So cost inflation is one component of that piece.
Right, I'm actually, just to clarify, I'm talking about table 3A, which is, I don't have it open to me, but that's UVM's overall, not for the surgery center. It's looking at your operating expenses year over year, which I thought was how typically cost inflation was backed out for the hospital, was looking at expense growth over time for the,
And it's question 6, Jessica.
Yeah, and then so question 5, on page 6 of the question 5 interrogatories, not you, sorry, shouldn't say you. The response was cost inflation was predicted to be 5%, 4%, 4%, and 3.5%. So I was just trying to understand, I'm trying to marry up the cost inflation estimates overall with the operating expense growth that I saw projected.
Hearing Officer Barber, could we pull up the growth assumptions that were just mentioned, which are, I think, on page 7 of our, well, actually not readily finding them.
Which question is it?
So I think we were looking at our responses to question set 5. And I'm not sure which page we were looking at.
I have page 6 in my notes, so.
Okay, you're right.
I see
My
the,
binder is
yep, it's
part of
question
it.
8.
So it was the response to Q8 of Q5. So that's
we
one
looking
set
at?
of inflation assumptions that we were looking at. And then I would also like to pull up and display our table 3 that we're referring to, because we submitted that table more than once. And I want to make
Oh,
sure
so I may
everyone
be
is
looking at
considering the
an
same
outdated table of that.
version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that I'm looking at the wrong versions of 3A or what, but I was just trying to understand cost inflation, because then I have a secondary question related to this, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding where your cost inflation is coming from. So that's one of the data points that I was looking at. And then the second, so it's 5, 4, 4, and 3.5. And then I was looking at a table 3A. It might have been an earlier table of 3A. But if we can pull up a table 3A. One of the many.
Mike, I think the last table 3A was submitted on June 15th of 23 in response to the board's Q2.
That's correct. It's Q002, June 15th.
Okay, I've got Q002 response. What page are we looking at?
This would have been an attachment to the responses, and it is the CON table conformed to the financial framework for the hospital.
Table 3A, there you go.
So which percentages on here, Jessica, are you?
Well, so for example, if you look at 2025, the total operating expense percent change looks like it's 3.2. For 2026, it looks like it's 3, I can't see, maybe 3 point something. I'm just trying to, I was looking at this expense growth and trying to marry it to some degree with this table. So like for 2025, let's take 2025, that was 3.2% is the projected percentage change in operating expenses, right? But you had 4% in 2025. So that's an example.
I think I'm looking
So
at.
is
two
that where
different-
you're getting cost inflation as an estimate of cost inflation from your percent change in operating expense, or is it some other method
No,
of
so-
calculating cost inflation?
Yeah. So I'll just make sure that Mark can validate what I'm about to tell you, but no, that total percent change in operating expense is a combination of both volume and cost inflation related items. So it's not just purely cost inflation.
Okay, so that would include the volume additions that are potentially anticipated for 2025 and 2026 and all that. This is pure price. This is purely price inflation. Because I feel like we've had back and forths about this over the years, and I've always felt like your cost inflation includes volume and my cost inflation is price only. So I that's an
Yeah, Mark, if you can just validate that I'm reading this chart correctly.
Yeah, so, those cost inflations that were listed on that previous file, that was up that you saw the individuals per year, that was pure price inflation, Jessica.
Okay. Okay. So in some years, your price inflation is higher than your price times volume inflation.
But we're kind of splitting hairs on percentages here, so, you know, yes, if you look at the exact number, this is a model, you know, and
Okay,
if you
all
look at the
right,
difference
fair.
between 3.5 and 3.8% when we're looking out, keep in mind that we submitted this over a year and a half ago, too.
Fair enough. I'm just trying to
Okay, yeah,
understand where all
so,
these numbers come from.
But
So-
yes, to answer your
so-
questions, price inflation, Jessica.
Okay. So my second question is, and this may have to go into executive session, and if that's the case, that's fine. I'll just leave it at this one. We can follow up. But I'm wondering, what are the assumed effective commercial rate increases for each of those years as assumed in the financial projections for the OSC? Given those cost inflation assumptions. Knowing that there's a difference between effective commercial rate and cost inflation.
You want to answer that, Eva or Mark?
I think that I can say is, at this time, what we really don't know, the biggest, when we look at what we expect rates to cover from a cost inflation perspective, and I'll just call out that there's a lot of conversation about that, and this is a deep conversation that we have in the annual budget process. But the biggest indicator on, or impactor on commercial rates is what happens with the other patient population too. You know, we've been very transparent about the calculation that we have this conversation annually. And there's a connectivity there. So, you know, to the extent that the other payers, meaning Medicare, Medicaid, keep up with cost inflation, the impact on the commercials will be less. So
No, I
I'll pause
understand that.
there.
I'm just
Rick, were
wondering
you
what
gonna say
assumptions
something?
you made in the pro forma, because there are
didn't
revenue
make any
projections, so
assumption.
there must be.
The,
You
the
didn't make any
assumption that we
assumptions.
made, the assumption that we made in the pro forma, that was applied equally to all payer categories.
Okay, so the assumption was the cost inflation would be, so Medicare would increase
Yes.
its reimbursement by 5%, Medicaid would increase its reimbursement by 5%. Okay, so if they don't, then the Medicare and Medicaid revenue expectations are too low, and if the board does not give the commensurate effective commercial rate that would be needed to keep cost inflation covered, then the commercial revenue is underestimated as well. Yeah or no?
So when I
Rick,
was
were you gonna
thinking,
say?
yeah, not necessarily. So again, going back to the how much of the OSC makes up of our total NPR. Right now, this plan is about 3% of our total NPR. So when we look at rates, as the board knows, we're submitting a request for an overall commercial rate, and then we work with our payers to work out, are we applying that to E&M codes? Are we applying that to surgeries, inpatient versus outpatient? And so we're working within the overall parameters of a commercial rate increase. And so, exactly how that's gonna work out in the future related to this OSC, we don't know at this point.
I guess I'm just trying to understand what is actually in the pro forma. What is the underlying commercial rate growth expected in the pro forma? But it sounds like there isn't that level of detail.
We
in the
applied
pro
the same
forma.
percentage across all the payers.
Does that make sense? So all of them, we made the same assumption that they're all going to grow the same percentage. Point one. Point two, it's about 3% of our overall when you look at the surgeries, just that ambulatory surgery center part. And then the negotiations that go on with the commercial payers and how, in any given year, it could be that they're going to fund a little bit more for cancer therapy, for surgical care. It's the total bundle that winds up mattering to us in our overall margin. So when you try to look at that portion of your commercial rates that are only going into this ambulatory surgery center, let's say it goes up, they're going to bring it down someplace else so that the net at the end of the day is going to be whatever the negotiated overall rate was. So it's hard. I guess I'm just trying to make the point. It's hard to come down and say, for this population, what is it going to be 3 years from now, 4 years? It's hard to do it for next year because of that variability that comes across when you're negotiating the overall rate and how, the insurance company, there's lots of factors that play into how they want to increase their rates or decrease their rates in particular areas that they may be thinking, gosh, we want to really drive rates down for mammograms, but we're willing to go a little bit higher over here because we think that the patient population, we're gonna do some work on trying to get them to do our patients to do something different. So all of those things are factoring in it. So it's really hard. And so we just made the assumption, I think Mark said, or Rick said, they're all going to go up the same amount, roughly.
Okay, let me just ask one follow-up question then to that, because I know you've done some work with IntelliMarker on reimbursements and reimbursement levels, and I'm just wondering if you have a starting point estimated for the weighted by volume and case mix average percentile price for the OSC. What percentile are you thinking that the OSC would start at relative to other OSCs? What percentile would it be? Weighted average across all services offered.
E, do you have that, or is it Mark? I mean,
It would be me, and I have to admit that we did it service line by service line, member homes, and I never did the average, probably in part because so many of these ASC are single purpose, right? But we could weight it. I think we could find a reasonable way of doing that. But no, I'm sorry to say we didn't do that.
Okay, that would be helpful if we could see if you think that there's a way to calculate that. Where are you starting from in terms of a benchmark to other? On average, how expensive relative to other OSCs will this OSC be for the commercial payer? And I'll end there because I think I've taken up more than my time. So thank you very much for answering all my questions. I appreciate it.
Great. I'll jump in. I'm next. I want to thank all of our team for all of their work. On this, it's a large project, and I want to thank UVM for all of their work. I appreciate your dedication to your community, and I've been impressed by the work that's gone into this application. My role in this process is different from yours. I need to put this application into both a community context and a statewide context. And so all that's to say, I've tried to work at least as equally hard in my role as you all have in yours. I'd like to start, and as with Robin and Jess, my binder numbers might be a little bit different, but I'll try to summarize what I'm looking at. And I don't have any tables that we need to dive into. So the first thing that I wanted to start with was the Certificate of Need Statutory Criteria 2B. It's on page 473 of my binder. But it says the project will not result in an undue increase in costs of medical care or an undue impact on the affordability for patients. And so I'm wondering if you did an analysis of how this project would affect the cost of medical care, not just the procedures and surgeries in the OSC, but medical care for Vermonters.
So I'll start, but I'm going to need some help from the finance people in terms of how we did that. We work very hard to balance access and need to care with the cost of procedures and the affordability. And what we can tell you is that cases that can be done on an outpatient basis typically cost less for people that don't have to stay overnight. Cases that can be moved from the main campus to outpatient surgery centers, the facilities fee is less. And so on an individual basis, it's better for patients if they can get patient in an outpatient surgery setting and they don't have to be admitted to the hospital. We know that for any one individual will keep the cost of care down. Also, because this project has a positive margin, we don't have to cost shift the dollars or something else. In fact, we can use these dollars for other things that lose money. And so this project being better than even frees up dollars, as Jessica was joking about, for potentially mental health care or other things that we know do not generate a positive margin. The details behind that, I'm going to turn over to the finance people. But at a high level, outpatient care is cheaper. Care that not delivered in the hospital, either Fanny Allen campus, which is counted as inpatient, or the main center campus, facilities fees less. People going home get lower charges and typically have less complications, recover more quickly. So at a high level, I think for our individual patients, they want outpatient surgery and it's typically better for their finances. Rick, do you want to add more of the detail?
Remember, Walsh, just to give you some concrete numbers. So in terms of the cases that are moving from one outpatient setting to the new outpatient setting, we projected a 2% decrease in commercial rates. So back to the starting point question that Member Holmes was asking, that just that shift alone, and we move an outpatient case from the main ORs or Fanny Allen to this new outpatient surgery center, commercial rates are going to go down by 2%. Any cases that we move from what Dr. Nichols was sharing earlier today, any cases that we move from the inpatient setting to the outpatient setting, commercial rates go down by 50%. For Medicare, same thing, rates go down by about 50% when you move from inpatient to outpatient. And then finally, Medicaid rates move from inpatient to outpatient, go down by 25%.
Thank you. So it's, and rightly so, it's the cost per case and the affordability for the patient who receives care in the facility. The cost per case is projected to go down compared to being in a hospital. And that would make it more affordable for that patient. I understand. The statutory criteria number 1 is that the proposed project aligns with statewide reform goals and principles. And I'm wondering if you conducted an analysis of the statewide impact of this project. I understand that how you've looked at it through an individual lens, but have you, I didn't see any in the submission, but want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Has there been an analysis on within your submission looking at the statewide effect of this proposal?
Well, I mean, we know that for the population that we serve, this outpatient surgery center will allow more than 4,000 more patients who need care to be able to receive that care in a timely fashion close to home. And so we were very focused on the population that we serve in our HSA that we're serving now. And we firmly believe that getting those people the care they need is the right thing to do. So we focused on that need.
Okay.
I believe that's a statewide approach. I believe that's making sure that people have access to high quality care in a timely fashion.
And the 4,000 patients that come up, I want to make sure I understand that. Is that a total of 4,000 patients by 2030, or is that 4,000 per year? I'm trying to make sure I follow that.
By 2030, without the outpatient surgery center, more than 4,000 patients per year will not get surgery in a timely fashion.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I understand that better. This was brought up earlier, I think, by the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. This is the HRAP Certificate of Need Standard 1.3. To the extent neighboring healthcare facilities provide services that will be provided by the new project, the applicant shall demonstrate a collaborative approach. And in the earlier discussion, I appreciate the tension between this standard and antitrust concerns. Right? But still, I'm wondering if you, if there was any type of analysis about how this project would impact neighboring healthcare facilities.
I'm going to start at a high level, but then I'm going to ask Eve to give detail behind that. This project was focused on the population that we serve, but we do know that our consultant analyst that looked at this did project that Northwest Medical Center by 2030 would be at capacity. We already heard Copley was at capacity, and that was confirmed. I can tell you right now, we are sending patients to CVMC and occasionally Porter, and the ability to get big volumes of patients down there just isn't easy to do with the limited times you can slot people in. It's actually a major job to get 100 patients down there this year. And we're going to do it, but it's complicated. And also, I'll tell you that if you look at Dr. Plant, right, who wants to have a full OR day, having him go back and forth between the medical center and even the Fanny, honestly, has an impact on how many cases he can do in a day. So it works much better if we say to Dr. Plant, hey, the whole day you're going to be at the OSC or the main campus, because going back and forth actually is car time is not good surgeon time. So we do know at a high level that we believe that all of the ORs around us will be full by 2030. But even more importantly, having our providers get in the car and drive to Northwest to do cases when they're not on the same electronic medical record, they may not have the same equipment. Who's going to take call? Are they the add-on case? Do they get the OR time? Are we going to displace one of their surgeons who has a case? I'll just tell you, Member Walsh, I've learned a lot about this year using CVMC, our partner as an example. It's complicated.
Yeah. There's a lot of friction. And earlier, Dave and Dr. Plant discussed some changes in patient migration patterns, and Dr. Plant mentioned some growing inflow for certain specialty care. For example, if robotics are more, if that's the state of the art for current technology, and there aren't robots in surrounding communities, more patients would be coming into, there'd be more inflow. I think that that's something that we as a board have to just, we have to try to keep in mind. In another earlier discussion just with Jess a few moments ago, it was mentioned that care out of state for Vermonters is more expensive. It was asserted that care out of state is more expensive than within state for Vermonters. And it wasn't clear to me what data that was based on. So could someone just describe to me how you compared the cost of care for Vermonters at UVM versus if that patient had the same procedure done in New Hampshire or New York or Boston?
We're going to have to pull that data for you. I think we said we don't exactly have that yet, but we will work on that.
Okay, great. And I'm wondering if you have any contingency plans if you see shifts in migration patterns. If you see an outflow, you're losing business to surrounding areas, or you're gaining a lot of business from surrounding communities. Do you have any contingency plans on what you might do for the good of the state, depending on what was happening?
I can tell you that over the past 18 months, under the leadership of Dr. Plant, Dr. Bender, and our nursing leadership, we've been running sprint rooms on the main OR campus here. So we've looked at where our greatest backlogs, greatest need, and really smart people like Chris Dillon figure out, hey, we can do more total joints right now. We're going to dedicate a sprint room to that a certain number of days per week. We're going to increase the number of cases we can do in a day. We work down a backlog, and then we go to the next one and the next one. I can also tell you we have to do more around weekend care. Many weekends, we're stretching our surgeons and anesthesiologists and learners to the absolute limit because many, many cases from across Vermont are ending up here, and we'll have people that, some weekends we do 30 plus cases with crews that are, really on call. I actually think the OSC will help that a little bit because I think a lot of times if you ask the surgeons, they say, well, I'm just going to get it done on Sunday late night because I'm worried about the add-on problem for Monday. And the OSC may help with that, but we have to build a better plan, the AMC, to deal with the volume across the state that shows up here. I will tell you, I'm proud that we serve that purpose, but it is at the expense of people working really hard on weekends. It's not sustainable.
Right. Yeah, that brings me to my next question. These are related to the Mathematica report that came to the GMCB. And I appreciate the conversation earlier between Dave and Eve regarding the various interpretations of what is an OR, what's a procedure, what's a case, and what is demand. The different definitions you'll end up with different estimations depending on the definition that you start with. This morning, I asked Dr. Nichols about the use of specialty teams, the anesthesiologists, the nurses who are committed fully to doing hip replacements or spinal fusions and the efficiency with that. And he talked about a relative lack of efficiency, especially post-pandemic. So I'm just trying to get a sense of your current capacity and utilization and how the estimations of future needs came about. So other than saying you're full, what's the current utilization rate for ORs and procedure rooms at UVM facilities?
Chris Dillon's probably in the best position to answer that.
Sure. So last month, April 2024, 80.1% across the main and the Fanny. March 2024, 80.9%. February 2024, 79.1%. So significantly above 75%, hovering around 80. There are occasional months where we're pushing up into the 82, 83%. These are just the last three that we had for you today.
All right, well, thank you. And are all of the current operating rooms and procedure rooms open during standard weekday hours, 7:30 to 5? I know in a lot of facilities, there'll be a procedure room that's a procedure room from 7:30 to noon and is something else in the afternoon. But I'm wondering in your facility, are all of the current ORs and procedure rooms open during standard weekday hours?
Patrick, go ahead. I see you nodding. Dr. Beck.
Sure. So the complicated answer is yes and no. So we run 25 ORs every day. We actually have small procedure rooms that count as operating rooms, but there are days when we don't have where those really small rooms, which are proverbial shoe boxes, they're 350 square feet compared to the 600 and some we really need, don't fit the equipment and the case types of the patients that we have. So there are occasional times where one is not being used, but it's not from a lack of staff or desire. It's from a lack of operational ability from the equipment standpoint, fitting in there.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you explaining that. What percentage of your ORs and procedure rooms are open during evenings and weekends? We've spoken anecdotally about surgeons fitting things in on Sunday evenings and such, and I know that that's not optimal. I'm not trying to advocate for creating exhausted surgeons, right? I understand that's not good for anybody.
Sure, I can give you a general sense. I'll try to be as concise as possible. We do plan to run several ORs late into the evening on weekday evenings, 3 or 4 that are scheduled to go late just by the nature of the surgery. If you're going to do two heart surgeries, it's probably not going to be finished by 5 p.m., etc. A long plastic surgery case may not finish. So we staff and plan accordingly to that. So on average, usually we'll have 5 or 6 operating rooms running till 7, 8, 9 p.m. or so on weekdays. And overnight, really talking about 11 o'clock or after, we usually can run 2 operating rooms plus labor and delivery, which is an OR that isn't even involved in this discussion. On weekends, during the daytime hours, we run 3 ORs and labor and delivery, and then at night it reflects the same as on weeknights. So we try to get as many people through during the daytime for patient satisfaction, but also for provider well-being and staffing goals. And then we do pare down and really become a urgent and emergent situation only, from 11 o'clock till 7 a.m.
I do want to quickly amplify the weekend situation from the surgeon side. It would be no surprise to anyone during this hearing that weekend work, whether it be from a staff or surgeon or anesthesiologist perspective, is not a big satisfier. We also talked to patients, and it was a big patient dissatisfier as well.
I think I agree in my experience that, consulting with a lot of different facilities, especially elective outpatient procedures. Nobody wants to have their spinal fusion start at 10 p.m. on a Friday, right? I get it. I'm trying to just drill down into what is the actual capacity right now and the utilization.
Absolutely. And those were situations where we were forced to look at where else can we fit volume. So we totally understand the question. Thank you.
And it also should be reflected that does not impact that 82% or 80% that Chris just rattled off for the last 3 months. After 5 o'clock, those hours are not counted in that utilization. Because utilization is 7, at least at the medical center, 7:30 to 5 o'clock. So that's the denominator. And then afterwards, everything else is additional cases beyond our denominator.
And Member Walsh, I'll just add that when we were forced to close the Fanny because of the air quality issues, we actually tried to run Saturday ORs to make up some of the volume, and patients didn't want to come. We would say, look, we can get you in, and we had providers like Dr. Harrington was one of our providers that was willing to sign up and do cases on weekends, and we couldn't fill the schedule.
Yeah. No, I do understand, and I am sympathetic to that. So again, I'm trying to get this a big picture. And the next thing kind of goes to the same thing with the staffing. There's been discussion about the capacity's full, and it's not because you don't have the people or the patients, it's because you don't have the space. But I'm wondering, as you look toward having an OSC, can you tell me a little bit about what you see as the challenges for having enough physicians, surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses? There was a conversation earlier with Jess. It sounded like you're anticipating a relatively high number of travelers to ensure their specialty knowledge. What percent are travelers now, and what do you see happening in the near and medium future?
Mary, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. Again, we talk about part of the ecosystem is having some percentage of travelers, and we've talked about our assumptions in the submission. And we are still using travelers depending on, I would say, depending on the service line. So it is very dependent on the skill mix and level. We are seeing, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, better performance for us hiring nurses in particular. So we're adding net nurses to our overall, as well as our ability to retain within the system. So during COVID, and I'm sure you're all aware, we had significant turnover, and that has come down and is much more manageable. So we have much more predictability, which is great for everybody. So, we are going to assume somewhere between the 10% and 25%. And as I mentioned earlier, parent anesthesia, the pre and post traveler numbers we have at Fanny Allen are really low right now. But those can change depending on the mix of employees. So we want to have the right assumptions in the plan. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it helps. It sounds like recent experience is 10 to 25% of certain staff type are travelers. And it was mentioned earlier that in the new OSC that you're currently anticipating that it'd be on the high end of that around maybe as high as 25%, while you're trying to find the people with the specialty knowledge.
I would actually say it a little differently. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually believe that the OSC will likely fill. The OSC will be a desirable place to work. It has on-site parking. It's Monday through Friday. We have the Fanny Allen people who will almost all go over there. And there's a number of staff and nurses at the main campus who are doing mostly outpatient surgery that'll be very happy to go to the OSC and work there. Overall, though, we will probably need to add some travelers. Once again, we made a very conservative projection in the pro forma. Our recruitment and retention is improving. And so I think 25 is the high end, but I think it's very likely I think the OSC may be nearly fully staffed as the Fanny Allen is. We may feel a little more of the pressure on the main campus with some people choosing to go to the outpatient setting.
Right.
But we committed to staffing it to have the rooms be open. And so we put a high number in there to be conservative.
I would quickly echo that, if I may, Steve. So that's what we saw the decades I've seen. The Fanny has always been staffed well, but there's two quick threads I want to add. One is we also in parallel are training our own peri-op staff. So we have a peri-op 101 program for nurses. We also have a surgical tech training program. And it's kudos also, Mary, you and team. The traveler rate has come down so much that now we're starting to see travelers want to sign on and become permanent staff. That is actually a very, very poignant shift. Whilst it's not large numbers, it's an important trend I think we can seize upon.
I just want to follow through with this a little bit. If the new facility is the shiny new place, right? It is possible that there'd be a shift. A lot of people would rather work there. Some of the material presented to us by you and our consultants talked about the added inpatient volume that would be allowed by having an outpatient facility. That added inpatient volume is what would drive the profitability of this project. Do you have a contingency plan if you're not able to have enough staff inpatient to create that volume? Have you thought through that, and what could you share with us what your thinking is? Got outpatient facility humming along, but inpatient's not staffed fully. But the inpatient is what was going to make this profitable in the early years.
So as we've done since the start of the pandemic in 2020, we've staffed the medical center to care for those who need us to the extent that we could. The only thing that's ever constrained us has been space. If we've needed to bring in travelers to care for everyone who needs it, we've done it up to using every room, double occupancy, and so on. So to your really good point, as we move people to the outpatient setting and we have some capacity on the main campus, we will make sure that we're staffing to take care of those patients that are here. And from a margin standpoint, the big cases that'll be filling those ORs, and traveler rates coming down, those cases should have a margin. But even if they don't, we're going to care for Vermonters who need us. That's why we're here.
In addition, Member Walsh, I would just add, so I do cardiac anesthesia, right? And right now it's often that those rooms are going till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and that takes a toll on the nursing staff quite significantly. And I talk to them, and the reason that there can be some turnover, and that is they get tired of being there at 9 or 10 o'clock every second or third night. When you have additional inpatient operating rooms to take care of those inpatients, and now their days are done at 5, it becomes much easier to not only recruit people into those specialty positions, but also to retain them. And so there are multiple people that have left where in a better hourly working circumstance, that would not have been the case. And so I see that there's potential benefits in that regard as well.
Yep, I get it. And you all are describing these situations that, would contribute to burnout, would, all kinds of things. That earlier in the day, when you were discussing the demand forecasting, there's the SG2 model that the Claritas, the SG2, the kind of the inner workings of are kind of the proprietary, and that makes it somewhat opaque. There's the HESLA model that you, or HALSA, HALSA.
HALSA.
HALSA. I was listening to that information and then also thinking about Dr. Nichols and the conversations with Dave and Jess and others about some of the inefficiencies that have arisen following COVID. And in that discussion of the HALSA model, there was a discussion of, do we use our current timestamps of when we start, when we end, what the turnover is, or do we look at a benchmark? And it seemed like most of the time, the choice was to look at the current functioning, current reality over the benchmark. But I'm wondering, doesn't that bake into the calculation some of these inefficiencies, where it's slower to turn over a small room, for example? And so doesn't the use of the current status kind of bake in the inefficiencies that have been described?
I'm going to go to Eve.
Thanks. Member
Hi, Eve.
Walsh, I'd like to go back for one quick second, and then I'll promise you I'll remember your question and answer that.
Okay.
But I'm going to respectfully disagree, as we did with Ascendient, in our response to their assertion that it was the inpatient margin that carried this project. And here's why I disagree with that. I don't think it's, from a financial analysis point of view, fair to skim off the top and then say, oh, the rest is left for the incremental outpatient surgeries, which is the way that Ascendient approached that. First, for this audience, we have to keep in mind that of the 8 ORs in this OSC, 5 of them are replacing 30-year-old ORs that are too small to do the surgeries. And in an incremental pro forma, there is no margin for replacing surgeries that you're just going to do in a better, more appropriate clinical space. So it's the one, in fact, Dr. Sanders and I have had back and forth about different ways of looking at this. But from a 5-year incremental pro forma standpoint, it's always a loser. you'll see when we replace an MRI, it's the same thing. Like unless we get super duper efficiency, there's no new revenue, and there's never enough to make that positive. So I just want to set the context there for the